It's the Real Estate Podcast, brought to you by ANZ Home Loans for financial well-beings.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Real Estate Breakfast, talking your property news, even on a Sunday morning, as heard on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts and Amazon. Sunday, November the 17th today. How disappointing were you yesterday? Millions of us were huddled around the TV to watch the fight that was so magnificently promoted, only to spectacularly fail. What was that? Social media has blown up overnight. Was that just a ruse? My sister told me to let it go, saying, look, Tyson is 58, long past his prime, but I told her that the fighter that we saw yesterday was not the power-punching Tyson we saw in training camp leading up to the fight. So my take is this. Netflix has probably done a minimum of a 3-deal fight contract with Jake Paul's promotion company. Tyson underperformed in every aspect. That is a given. But now has the opportunity, Tyson that is, to fight someone else and totally redeem himself by probably destroying the other fighter. So have Jake Paul and Tyson created a comeback story for Tyson? Because let's face it, this isn't a pure boxing competition. It's more bent towards entertainment first and foremost. So that is my take. Let us know what you think, whether you agree or disagree, or you might have another wild theory as to what was going on with that fight. Our email address, as always, is myrealestatepodcast@gmail.com. We're coming up next. We look back over the last 7 days with some of those key interviews.
Every week we present so much real estate.
Yes, we've got a huge housing crisis in Perth and in WA. There is a lot of people literally beginning to live on the street and in their cars. And I get calls all day, every day from buyers and tenants who have been displaced and they've literally got nowhere to live. And they can't get into the housing market. The prices have gone through the roof. It's quite a difficult situation. So these tiny homes could certainly offer an opportunity for people to get in on a temporary basis. And it's looking like councils are starting to consider this as an option and an opportunity as a temporary relief during this period of time, just to give them, rather than living on the street and rather than living in a car when they've got dogs and children. It's quite sad and diabolical, really hard to hear, especially when people come to me and I literally say to them, I just can't help you.
How's your 2024 been? A few highs and lows?
Well, the highs are that properties go on the market and sell quickly. The lows are that there is a lot of buyer fatigue. The sellers are delighted, but there are a lot of sellers who would love to sell but have got nowhere to go. So it's creating a bit of stickiness and stuck in the marketplace. It's not opening up pathways for buyers to come in. It's putting a lot of pressure on the supply and demand balance. So as a empath, whilst I love the highs of real estate and knowing that every time I hand over a set of keys, I'm giving joy to a new family to move in, the same with the rental market. Every time I put a property on the market for sale or rent, I feel like I'm giving an opportunity for a family to live. But the downside is that there are so many more missing out. So that would be the lows. In terms of the market, it is buoyant, it is strong. There is no signs of it slowing down. When you look at the elements that prop up a real estate market in Western Australia, there is really no relief in sight. The rental market is just as weak in terms of availability and vacancy rates, and landlords' prices have gone through the roof. That is also a direct result of the interest rate hikes and mortgage repayments. So it's put a lot of pressure on tenants.
And the buyer's fatigue that you were talking about earlier, how much of that FOMO has crept back into your market, particularly probably over the last 6 to 8 months?
If we look at the GFC, just before that, when we had the boom in WA, that was all driven by FOMO. The last boom we had in Perth was 100% driven by FOMO. There was nothing propping up the demand and the hype. It was all media. It was all, oh my gosh, we're going to miss out. But this is genuinely being driven by not having a roof over my head, not really by a fear of missing out. There is a small percentage of buyers who are wanting to buy and get into the market now because they can see that the market is going to strengthen and that the market may well strengthen beyond their means. So they're trying to get into the market now. But for the majority, from my point of view, it's people who literally are downsizing, upsizing, getting into the market for the first time and need a roof over their head.
Ready to step up your property knowledge? Access powerful insights with us.
That was a little bit of a surprise, eh? What did you think last week's general election result?
First of all, thank you for having me on this morning, Craig. I really appreciate it. I think people are looking at this as the greatest political comeback in U.S. history. It's very interesting. And I think what people have voted for are their fears more than the hopes. Trump is promising a lot of things that are going to bring us back to pre-pandemic times. I do wish him the best of luck. I hope we get there to the best of his ability. I think people are going to learn about the economy and how it works in the U.S. place in the world over the next 4 years. So I'm looking forward to a very interesting 4 years and probably in some ways different than his first 4 years.
Yeah, well, of course, here in Australia, one of the big talking points has been the trade tariffs. Now, if that's implemented and if it's implemented widely, Australia is going to take a little bit of a hit on that, along with many other countries. So there's a lot of nervousness, I think we could fair to say, right around the world from different markets.
Yeah, tariffs, I mean, if they're strategic, that's one thing, but across the board, they're a tax on the consumer. And here in the U.S., I think the appeal to a lot of Trump voters is bringing back manufacturing, which is now about 10% of the GDP and 10% of workers. But the inflation impacts everyone. It'll be interesting to see how he threads that needle. And then you have retaliation from other governments on tariffs. So it can get very, very messy. So I hope they just keep it strategic.
Yeah, and just in terms of the immigration is interesting in terms of the mass deportations that he's talked about. I think what people don't realise is the market in terms of the immigrants buying into the real estate market. That's a bit of a number, isn't it, in terms of that cohort?
Well, it's more impacting the rental market. When people come, they live in urban areas and they rent for the first couple of years. It's difficult for them to buy a mortgage. There are specific type of mortgages for undocumented immigrants that are a bit more expensive than traditional mortgages. And what I was reading, even if those people get deported, the family that remains still manages to pay the mortgage. So I don't know how much that would actually open up supply.
And just before I let you go, I don't know if you can actually answer this one, but the other day I was talking about traditional media versus social media and how much of a factor was the Elon Musk and the Joe Rogan, the sit-downs for Trump pre-election, how much of a factor that might have played in the final tally-up.
Yeah, I think you raise a good question about the change in media. The media seems to talk to each other. And apparently Trump's son, Barron, advised them where to go and what podcasts to go on, including Joe Rogan's. And when Harris didn't go on, that caused a problem, I guess, for those people that wanted to hear from her on that platform. So I think part of that's just the overall shift from where people get their news away from traditional mainstream media towards TikTok, YouTube, and also hopefully U.S. News, because we're always online. It's sort of the first time we've seen a shift like this towards that it's actually maybe changed in a presidential election.
Every week, unravel the real estate market to empower your real estate knowledge.
Good stuff, because it is such a fantastic way of keeping fit. I had an ex-girlfriend of mine who was into jazz and all of that fast dancing. I mean, I didn't know how she did it, but she was super fit as a result.
Well, I do 3 hours on a Tuesday night You know, as I said, the oldest in the group, there's a 60-year-old and then a couple in their 50s and a lot of ladies are in their 40s. But I've got to say, the three pillars of aging really are mental stimulation, community and fitness. There's diet as well. I don't get any of that through my dancing, but the other three I do. So I've got a great community of people that I dance with and we're very close with each other. I get the fitness for sure from that. And whenever I go to a physio, they're always amazed at my flexibility, particularly for my age. And then, of course, you're getting that mental stimulation because we've got to remember all of those routines and get them right. So the choreography can be quite tricky to learn, especially when it's difficult choreography. It's a great way to age, and you have so much fun that it doesn't become a chore to go out and exercise. And I think that's the key to being able to stay young.
And since we're talking about these suburbs, let's grab your biggest standout suburb in Australia for 2024. What would that be?
So I'm now talking about a suburb that started to come through fairly quietly, but I think has much more to come yet, because I think that's important. It's easy enough to look around the country and to pinpoint the standout suburbs. I own property in a couple of the Adelaide ones where prior to 2024, they'd been fairly quiet and I gained $150,000 in value in a very short period of time in them. And that includes the northern suburbs in the less desirable part of Adelaide, up and around the Elizabeth Market, and certainly down the southern suburbs in the Onkaparinga Shire. Those suburbs did exceptionally well and are very standout. Over to Perth, we've got those suburbs also down in the southern suburbs, the more affordable areas that went from a $350,000 house to a $500,000 house in 12 months. And if you're thinking percentage increase, if you have a $350,000 house that goes up by $150,000, that's a significant increase in its intrinsic value over maybe $1 million house that goes to 1.2. So there are a couple of the standout areas, but one of the very quiet areas that has come through that has been up and down over the past 10 years is actually Townsville. We're starting to see a big culture change in Townsville. We're getting a lot of infill and infrastructure development by councils so that it becomes a real lifestyle choice to live there. Certainly a place where a family can be raised in a really, really good lifestyle that you just couldn't afford to have if you were going back to one of the capital cities. And there are a number of areas within Townsville that seem to be more favoured by others, including Castle Hill. Alligator Creek, interestingly enough, I'm pretty confident that there's probably no alligators in Alligator Creek, but there could be, and Bowley Plains. So they're the kinds of areas that people are starting to look in and really getting a great sense of community, lots of services for families, but also that lifestyle is coming into Townsville as well.
We are more than just a real estate podcast. Follow each week all of the main talking points and know your property.
It's really hard as a teacher and a single mum to be able to afford a property. So kind of having an apartment or a unit was a way for us to get into the housing market.
The companies hired to manage these buildings are cashing in to the tune of $7 billion a year.
It's the hidden costs. It's the random mismanagement costs that you know nothing about.
It's almost as if the whole business model has been designed to, frankly, screw Australian apartment owners.
And I guess that's a question for you. Do you feel like you're being screwed over? Well, let's welcome and catch up once again with Nick Buick, the founder and CEO of the On-Site Manager this morning. And good morning to you, Nick. Welcome back to the Real Estate Breakfast. I guess the first question is talking about some of this potential corruption in strata as covered by Four Corners. Can it be avoided?
Yeah, good morning, Craig. Thanks for having us. It's a pretty poignant question at the moment. I'm speaking from a perspective of someone who works in management rights in Queensland. We've had our eye on this problem for quite a while up here, and it was quite vindicating to see that Four Corners article come out. I think it can be avoided, and I think the best way to avoid corruption in strata is through separation of powers. That's something that we have in our legislation in Queensland, and it's something that doesn't exist down south, which I think has directly led to the problems that we're seeing.
Yeah, there seems to be this real hot point at the moment where there's this illumination going on with some of these fees. You're working in a different state. I mean, how much have you sort of seen that firsthand, perhaps in other states?
Yeah, we've been pretty involved because the last 6 years, those very same strata groups down south that have now been caught red-handed engaging in this sort of conduct have been lobbying the Queensland government very heavily, and they are very well financed. They have a lot of money behind them because of some of the issues that we've just seen. And they've been lobbying the state government very hard to introduce the same laws in Queensland that we see down south, obviously, so that they can get involved in strata in Queensland. Alex Cook, who normally does the show with me, he's actually worked on the government steering committee that advised on those laws and their feasibility. And luckily, it seems like those laws aren't going to go ahead. So we're going to get to keep the laws that we have in Queensland, which have avoided some of this corruption that we're seeing.
I see that new dwelling starts in Perth. Now, they seem to be rising. So talk to that and whether or not you expect that trend to continue.
Yeah, they've certainly been rising for a while and at an increasing rate in recent months, whether it's investors or owner-occupiers, again at the lower price points, not seeing as much value in the established market and then turning to the idea of construction. So we have seen a decent uptick, albeit again off a very low base. So we're still not building at a rate that is going to satisfy demand long term, but at least it's trending in the right direction. In terms of whether it continues to trend in that direction, I don't think so. I think the appetite for construction, having kicked off again at those lower price points, has had an impact already in a very short time frame on build costs and trade availability, and therefore time frames to actually construct. So I would caution people against building, not in all circumstances, but certainly if you don't understand the landscape, if you haven't got decent contingencies built into your plan to allow for cost blowouts or time frame blowouts or both, then I would be cautioning against building in Perth at the moment. I noticed an article last week. They spoke about the fact that back in 2018 and 2019, the typical home to construct in Perth with the time frame was sitting at around 8.7 months. And now that's sitting at 17.8 months. So it's basically doubled throughout that time frame, and now it's trending again in the wrong direction. So with the cost of money still being very high, construction may not make sense for a lot of people.
Yeah, we were just talking about that very aspect earlier in the week with Margaret Lomas. Now, just on that, are you recommending that probably people shouldn't be building in Perth, or are there exceptions to the rule? What do you think?
If the financial side is less important to you, as in if you've got a decent enough budget and income and you're less concerned with spending a little bit more to get what you want and you want to build a new home, then that's your prerogative. Go ahead. But if you're building at the lower price points and you're perhaps paying rent at high rates elsewhere, you want to make sure that you're positioned to weather a long build time and higher lending costs throughout. If you're a developer, so if you're particularly small developers who are looking at sites and running feasibilities, if you're buying at today's prices and if you know how to run a feasibility study properly, odds are most sites out there are not profitable enough to be greenlit. And if you are going ahead, you're probably reliant on continued upward pressure on the value of your completed product.
We connect you to the best real estate information across Australia. The Real Estate Podcast.